Hey, Paul and Karen, thank you guys for joining us again here tonight. We are first time we're coming from three different time zones simultaneously. Thank you guys for being here. I know it was a really fun weekend for Father's Day and Sports World Cup, and I was able last week to get out to Boston a little bit, see some of the festivities of the Scottish folk, and then obviously some of the Pride Month activities. So, Karen, I know we were talking a little bit. I know it sounds like you had a so crazy in Providence, you know where to start, huh? So it sounds like a
Yeah,
lot
no,
going
with
on,
so much
right?
going on and so
Yeah,
much going on in Providence and so much, positivity and good feelings, which is really so important. Unfortunately, because Providence is not an easy city to get into, that we don't have the T like Boston. So
sure.
it makes parking really tough. So in some ways it makes it really inaccessible
Yeah,
to get to a lot of these things, which is unfortunate because everything I saw from friends and folks on Facebook, really a lot of positivity between Pride and Tartan Army, World Cup, watch parties, those kind of things. It was just a nice dose of good feeling in Providence. So we could use that.
yeah. It's funny. My brother brought up yesterday. We were talking about. He was talking about he does some Uber driving. He was talking about how when Yale Harvard is in New Haven, the city shuts down. But what's in Boston is just a little bump on the radar screen.
Yeah.
So it's like same kind of thing, right? It's the infrastructure, et cetera. But it's great. It's great to see, though. It's I think it's one of the things that's fun is that I think that people are saying, "Hey, look, the world loves America." Again, like no, the world loves American cities that are run by Democrats. That's the world loves,
Hmm.
right now.
Gotta
So
love those blue cities.
yeah. And Paul, I know you got your looking like a New York year for you again. Like for once, you
Yeah,
know.
it's interesting. Most folks, I can remember, 69 was the Miracle Mets. And so most folks think of the Jets as the 68, but
Yep.
they actually, the Super Bowl was played in
69, sure.
69.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
69 was quite the year. And, Joe Namath and predicting
Yeah.
the victory and whatnot. And so, you
Well,
never
cities
know.
have
Like,
these years. Yeah.
pardon?
Cities have these years. It seems like all their teams are flying, and it seems like New
Yeah.
York might be setting ourselves up for one of those,
Yeah, it's
So,
we'll see. But, yeah, I mean, so I don't know if that means I have a good memory or I'm just old, but yeah, 69 was a significant year. And that was back, again, and this will kind of lead into some of our discussion on, technology and stuff. But that was back in the days when the teacher was a big deal, would bring a little TV into the classroom and you'd watch the game because the World Series was always on in the afternoon.
sure.
And
Yeah,
so
Oh,
definitely.
yeah,
But
so I can remember I can't remember what grade I was in, fifth, sixth grade, something like that. Bring in the TV so we could watch
yeah,
that year was the Mets and the Orioles, I believe. But
yeah.
yes, New York's
Great.
on a roll. And it's good. Again, it's reflective of the leadership and stuff. Again, as we talked about those blue states, those blue
Super.
cities.
But you wonder now with getting to our subject at hand with AI. I think you're starting to get all this predictive analysis. And I goes back. I think a little bit about and then Back to the Future, Gray Sports Almanac, and trying to predict everything. But it's almost you wonder if we're going to start to see some of the fun taken out with ability to kind of reach into the future. But I think that America's favorite sport in my mind is always politics. And Paul, I know you've had some thoughts on how this is going to affect our political discourse now as we head into it. Yeah,
Well, just kind of taking the sports angle one more and then tie it back into the politics. So this, we talked a little bit about the evolution of the internet, and I'm the oldest of the three of us, but everyone's old enough that we can see the evolution. So, I was telling,
sure.
you know, I, I was pretty excited years ago when I was teaching, and I had a 50 megabyte hard drive in my classroom, and we had 10 Apple IIe's. Okay, so that just tells you, the how ancient it was and what the technology was, and now we're here with the technology and trying to evaluate the overflow of information and the accuracy and what's real and what's not real. And kind of interesting this week, um, I've been reading that book, Shittification, and it talks a lot about the ads with Google and Facebook. And so now, as a tie into the AI, is you've had all these ads for different things, um, about the Knicks.
Yeah.
And so they've had, they have Jalen Brunson there, and it's not him,
Yeah.
selling this T-shirt or this particular thing. And so, and as you parlay into um, the anything that's political or anything that, like, I think today my wife saw a picture, a little clip that had a false video that was portraying that Trump had been attempted another attempted assassination, and sure enough, it was just an AI fake. And so, as we go down this journey that we're all going to go through, is the first thing we all say when we see things now has to be, well, is that real? Is that accurate? Did that really happen? And so now you have this potential, this source of information and knowledge, and now it's delayed because now you got to process, the what and the how and where, right? Where everything came from, and how do you move on? And President Trump has been the master of putting out false information. So I think the journey we go, and as we pivot to the midterms and stuff, this week is primaries for us, and just evaluating a lot of the information is going to continually be challenging. And unfortunately, we as a population don't always exercise the best discretion on trying to decide what's real and what's not real. If it fits the narrative that we're most comfortable with, then we latch on to that. So here we go,
Yeah,
man.
I think it's interesting, that now AI has become such a thing. And now, I think educated people are asking the question, like you just said, Paul, like, okay, is this real? What other fact finding do I have to do? What other digging do I have to do to determine whether it's real? And like you said, Orange Nazi was the one that was starting with, the whole fake news and just putting out lies as though they're facts. The citizenship, the general populace was not doing such a great job with him ferreting out whether or not things were true or not, and didn't like their reality disturbed by having fact checkers, right? And then they were saying it's fraud, and it's not this and it's not that, and so now some of the same I worry about some of these same people blindly believing the AI stuff, without doing those fact checks, without researching a little bit, because we're already showing it's not a long time, but since 2016, we've been fed a line of crap, and lies. And a lot of people are just like, yep, yep, yep. And like you said, Paul, if it fits with the narrative they're most comfortable with, they'll run with it. And that's terrifying.
And I think to your point, Karen, I think what Trump does as well is he uses, it's like when people now they do a post on social media and they say, "Oh, I was hacked," because they don't want they want to own the post. I think Trump uses the fact it could be fake to disguise his insanity that he puts out there. That it was
Mm-hmm.
that was fake, that wasn't real, and so that's why you got people now screenshotting everything he does, and it's. But I think the effect on just people in general of this, you're trying to, I think you brought up, while educated people are struggling with it, people who maybe haven't learned the critical thinking skills. I'm sure, Karen, you must run into some people in your line of work
Oh yeah.
that struggle with reality now has become that much harder. It's all for all of us at this moment.
Yeah, well, I think that's always the challenge in terms of who's the general population, right?
Mhm.
They're generally, the more education you have, the better you are at critical thinking. And, you know, the MAGA base is largely very uneducated or undereducated. And so, they lack those critical thinking skills, just the very basic, does this seem real? Can a cat really dance like that? How did they train them to do that? Right. Um, from the most basic things. And it's, my kids get a big kick out of, saying, "Oh, mom, is this real? Is this real? Do you think this is AI?" Right. And, I'm pretty good at detecting, even, you know, besides the dancing cats, what is AI and what isn't, just from like a still picture or whatever. But it's not easy. And if you don't have an eye for that, or you're not willing to do a little more digging, you can get sucked in really easily. That's the concern with AI.
I find half of my Facebook posts are memes aren't news. That's my favorite
Right.
phrase. Everybody they catch these memes and they treat it like it's something was broadcast, something that came through a normal news channel, and it's like it just looks because it looks pretty, it doesn't make it news, right? So
Right.
it's scary times.
Well, and you look, traditionally. So again, if you look at a Republican um, base and the Republican, the word I'm looking for, so sorry, but their format, it's always been, tax less government, less spending, and then if you do any amount of research, we know that that's exactly the opposite. When the Republican administration comes in, our deficit just explodes, and Trump has redefined that, right?
Yep.
But they're like a dog on a bone. They can stay with that narrative at nausea. I'm just completely just stay with that narrative, and what Karin was speaking about, that the base will hang on to that, and so again. Um, they're attacking fraud, which everybody, no one has an argument with that or anything like that, but at the balance, we're trying to increase the deficit. I mean, excuse me, the defense spending 50% this year, and then they're pivoting again to Social Security and these type of things. But historically, and this is where AI, I think, could become helpful if people would reach into, because you can fact check or do a little work on what has been the effectiveness financially of different administrations, whether it's Democratic and Republican, and it's mind boggling. It's just right in your face. It's not hard, and it's just factual. It's not biased. It's not someone is bad or good. It's just when the Republicans come in, the deficit explodes, starting with Reagan, and except for Clinton, and then we have Clinton who balanced the budget. So go figure.
And I think where you can almost hear the words coming out of their mouth now is if they don't like because AI one, and we've been dealing with this a little bit in companies I've been with, is the AI really is built on it sometimes doesn't discern information well. So it'll go out and it might grab something
Right.
from Fox News if it's factual, and it doesn't put any flag in there. Well, this might be from less. It might grab it from, let's say, even an obvious bad source, the National Enquirer. But you could almost hear when, and you're right, Paul, I'm sure if we ran an analysis, like you see those analysis of, how many jobs the Democrats created versus Republicans. And again, over the
Absolutely.
last 60 years, we've had basically a balance of Republican and Democratic presidents. And I can almost hear them saying, "Well, the Democrats built the Bill AI."
Yeah.
It's like they're going to blame. They're going to say the source information is flawed. It's almost you can't win because, to the point, the critical thinking skills are lacking in terms of
Right.
what we don't. It doesn't take a lot of math to look back at the last 50 years to figure out where we've had good economies or we've had bad. It doesn't take a lot of,
No, but
but yeah,
you have to want to look for actual
yeah,
factual information, things
right,
that might make you uncomfortable, right? And make you question something, the belief that you've held for so
sure,
long,
sure.
tight with two fists. And I mean, again, a lot of the Republican agendas and about, cries for money and all this stuff, they base it in fear,
Hmm.
right? They prey on the fears of like, oh, well, it's the immigrants, it's the welfare queens, it's the single mothers. When if you look statistically, it's not. This is not where the money's going. The money is going to the defense budget. The money is going to the corporations, um, the insurance company, businesses. It's not going to the people, you know. But those are the ones we got to blame because that's easier to sell.
It's pennies on the dollar compared to you're right, the big numbers are going, and it's obviously you've got the big entitlements like Social Security and Medicare, but Social Security is not it's not a gift. We all worked and we earned it. Medicare is a more complicated issue because I think the mechanism wasn't put in place to anticipate the cost structure we have today. But so much goes to defense now, and then frankly, we not only just spent a ton of money on a war, which wasn't even a tie. We didn't get back to where we started,
No.
but now now we got to replenish a shitload of weapons, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, that
Wow.
we depleted, expensive weapons, chasing much cheaper
Mhm.
weapons around Iran. So, yeah.
And so it's interesting because, this is historically, again, um, we're we're a little bit older. We got some history behind us, but we've all kind of seen the cycle of, okay, when new technology comes on board,
Mhm.
the hysteria, we're going to dumb us down, we're going to, whether the television is going to, just going to, kids are going to sit in front of the television, I had my grandson over today, and he just tells me what he wants on a screen. We at least only watch cartoons on Saturday morning,
Mhm.
but but there's always that impact of what's the technology going to have on the general public. Are we going to dumb ourselves down? And the sky is falling. I mean, if you go back and you look at the '60 election and the capacity of Kennedy to parlay and use the televised debate, as opposed to, I mean, Nixon looks like he's having a coronary during that debate, right?
And
And
that's probably the election. When you think about how
it
close
is
the
because it
election
was
was,
so
it
dang
probably turns
close.
the election. Yeah. Yeah.
Jack was tanned and composed and
Yeah.
this good-looking young guy, and so all the technology has the impact. And now and it's really interesting based on this. The last election, well, starting with 16 and 20, and then 24. Um, President Trump was really crying, foul about how Facebook and these different folks were using or filtering information, and then who donated, which individuals donated, and who was sitting up at the behind him in the inauguration. So he was able to spin that thing so quick. But you can see historically, the impact of, first of all, the community as a whole, the anxiety that folks have with new technology and what it's going to be, and then how the political realm pivots on that. And then speaking from my educational hat, the technology, got us through COVID for better or for worse. It's, we're going to be talking about the impact of education, the COVID had on education and these children. But I think, that all of a sudden folks thought that, online Canvas, these type of things were the pieces that we wanted to use educationally, and that's pivoting now. Now we've got this movement to get back to paper and pencil, which I always thought we should have. I thought those things were just basically
Well, I
convenient
think
to
I think we
communicate.
almost have to now, because I don't know, understand how, my wife always likes to talk about microfiche, and microfiche really made you be a researcher, right? Because
Right.
Yeah.
you had to physically do the research. But how, I
I'm
mean,
having PTSD. Stop.
I'm thankful for a lot of ways, mostly because the payments are over, but that my kids are all through school now, because how are they going to figure this out? I mean, you almost can't do a Google search now without running into AI. So almost everything, and I know
Yeah.
they've got the filters and all that stuff, but soon AI is going to be like how to out filter their own filters and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
how are kids going to actually learn in this environment, and how are they going to prove they
I
learn
don't,
in this environment?
I stopped adjunct teaching about 4 years ago. And as much as I loved teaching, I really did. I'm incredibly relieved that I'm not in the classroom right now, because searching for plagiarism was hard enough, frankly.
Oh,
Um, and the amount of AI stuff that is running through college campuses now is just, I don't know how you'd find it. I really don't. And I don't know how you impress upon the students, even older students, that it's not worth it, right, in the long run. Um, because it is such a tool that they're leaning on. In some places, in some areas, they're telling you to lean on that and use it as a tool. I got my bachelor's and my master's in the mid to late 90s, and so all my papers, things, research was microfiche, the periodic, I can't remember, the
periodic
periodic guide.
table of literature, right?
No,
Periodic table, no?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yep, the periodicals.
yeah.
So when I went back and got my doctorate in between 2018 and 2022, the leaps from how you could research, I mean, it was so much easier. I was like, wow, you people cheated, because
Yeah.
you had Google to help you through your graduate degrees. But you know I had, an employer put out kind of the memo, like if you're putting out any emails that are um, kind of like mass emails or flyers or things like that, use AI, use Chat GPT, run it through, to clean it up. And I said, I worked really hard to learn how to write and to develop a thicker skin about having somebody, an actual person sitting next to me, edit my work.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to lose that skill.
Yeah.
And this is a skill that I think a lot of young people in their 20s, my kids' ages, aren't going to develop the same way. And so it makes me a little nervous when they're the ones in running the corporations, running the governments, and they don't know how to have original thoughts.
But you just hit on something that was really essential, or really crucial to my professional development. I mean, I'm just, most of my siblings are really well written. Some of them are published. Lana was, they write really well, and that gene skipped me. I am absolutely horrific at writing, and I remember when I first became an assistant principal, and the associate principal had an office next door, and he walked in one day and just, hey, will you edit this? And it was just kind of like this relief just came over me, because then that comfort level of taking him something I wrote, and and having him edit it, because I really am just an absolute horrific editor. How I got through any of my degrees is nothing short of a miracle, except for maybe my better half, and and my kids write well and stuff. But there's a piece that really struck me when you said that sense of community, that human relationship, saying, "Hey, will you take a look at this? Will you?" I had one of my assistant principals. I really just surrounded myself with great editors. Is what I did. That was my strategy, rather than AI, right? The people. But the
Right.
one guy said, "You do this wrong every time. I'm just used to
Yeah.
fixing it."
No.
But that relationship with each other, just having someone, hey, will you look at this? What do you think? And so even besides just the finished product, having the confidence of talking and working together, crucial, and it makes a better workforce, better product, increases learning. I think all those things.
Well, yeah, because you're increasing your critical thinking skills by getting someone else's opinion, not just in the flow of a sentence or a paragraph, but is it making sense? And then maybe challenging some of those paragraphs or beliefs when you make a statement that, I believe such and such is contributing to whatever. And they say, well, but why? Why do you say that? Right? Maybe it bumps up against some of their beliefs or their thoughts, or just you're challenging one of their conceptions, right? You're not only building community, you're building each other's critical thinking skills by not only being able to have someone who's comfortable enough to ask that question, but for you to receive that question and say, okay, well, why did I write that? Why do I believe that? Well, how did I take all that information that I got from the microfiche and synthesize it and put it into those words? It makes you more confident in what you are writing, what you're believing, what you're saying, even if it's just for that one paper.
Yeah.
And I've been a little patient on this one, is because you both obviously have much, dwarf my experience as an educator. But one of the things I've come around to believing, through my kids, through my own experience, and this gets in this whole argument now of, do kids need to go to school, college, or whatever? And I've seen it, frankly, from some of the best business people I know are not business, students, come from business schools. Is To me, you don't learn a lot in school that you actually apply beyond school. In my profession, anyway, I can't speak for everybody else's, but I think what you learn is critical thinking skills, and that's where I think, to your point, I think, Karen, if you're not learning to research, the strategy around building a paper is almost as important as the actual paper itself. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
did I go about structuring? How did I go about the research? Like, I used to always have a thing is, I always like to do papers that were around current events because those are the easiest things to find. So my strategy was kind of like, let's think about things that are gonna be easier to research. Maybe it was a shortcut, but I think that, so you think about kids who are street smart, and I run into a lot of these people in business. Some of them, frankly, that education maybe isn't where, doesn't have the pedigree, but they're awesome what they do because they had critical thinking skills in their blood. They whatever. So yeah, they maybe didn't need school as much. Some people probably go to school for 100 years and never learn any critical thinking skills. But I always say that college is a great place to develop them. And if you need it and you're there, and so I think the world we're heading into now where people are starting to say, well, is a college degree overrated or whatever? It's like, well, it's overrated if you're not getting the critical thinking skills out of it. And if people are, in a sense, I won't say cheating, but taking shortcuts with technology, yeah, they're not learning those critical thinking skills. That really, to me, is the whole value of their education.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think, it depends on the profession. It
Yeah,
depends on the
exactly.
workforce
sure.
that you're talking about, whether or not college degrees are overrated.
Yep.
But I think to your point, it's kind of like the K-12 education.
Mhm.
It's not the bigger point of that, like how many times do we use algebra in our daily lives? But it's the fact that you're getting out and you're mixing your kids with other kids, right? Other religions, other ethnicities, other belief systems. And I think that's one of the biggest dangers of something like homeschooling
Mhm.
is because you're only putting into the kids your own knowledge, your own beliefs, and that's not how they're going to live, right? It can be about protection, it can be about religion, it can be about all kinds of different things. But at the end of the day, you're missing out on exposing your children early to the other people they're going to run into later in life. And how do you develop those skills when somebody's mean to you, when somebody's teasing, when somebody makes you uncomfortable, right? How do you handle that? Because I guarantee you're not going to be able to live in that same bubble as an adult professional and actually earn money.
I completely agree. I think we did send one of our kids to private schools for specific reasons, but I always said to Mary Alice, we live in an area where, and obviously all New England is, I think, do private or public schools, but I said, public schools life, and that's important. That you get, and not the private schools that all gone on either, but I think that so beyond, and I completely agree with what you're saying about homeschooling. Parents have good reasons for doing it, but for the most part, you want to have your children exposed, and frankly, it's just part of the parenting skills too. Because part of I think the reason sometimes you'll withdraw their kids is because they have struggle with it. But that's part of we as individuals should never stop growing either. And I think part of it is our own ability to deal with these things. We got to grow. We need growth in those areas too as adults. And obviously, most of us move into the grandchildren age if we're not there already. But that continuing
Bite your tongue.
development of dealing with people is part of what this is all about. And it's,
Yeah. And I mean, no shade to private schools. I think
yeah,
that,
yeah, sure.
again, you're mixing the kids together in
Yeah,
just this really big tossed salad of
sure.
all different, you're not going to be the smartest, most athletic, richest kid, no matter what kind of school you
Yeah,
go to. There's going to be
sure.
people with different beliefs or different focuses. And that's great. That's exactly what you should be doing as you're, in your K-12 years. And then fine tuning that as your brain's growing in college to get those critical thinking skills and hopefully maybe some of those street smarts too.
Mhm.
Because there's nothing worse than a really brilliant person who gets hit crossing the road because they forgot to look both ways.
Exactly. There's actually a movie, and it's such a stupid movie, but it's one of the stupid movies that hits on a lot of interesting things. It's a movie called Idiocracy. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen that, but and in the movie, it's that this is you might hear this thing where people say we're a couple weeks away from using Gatorade to water the plants. That's part of what they do in Idiocracy. They don't understand why the plants are dying because the Gatorade manufacturer sold the government. And it's not Gatorade; they use a fake name, but they've sold the government using Gatorade to water the plants because they're trying to make money. But there's a part in there that they've got like I would say a bunch of yahoos and they're reproducing like the Brady Bunch screen, like kind of something like we're doing, where it's dividing and are having kids after kids, and they've got the two wealthy people who are sitting there wringing their hands over having one child. And so it's almost like it brings up all these points about the common sense versus the common man. But it's such a stupid movie that brings up so many of the points we're trying to get past at this point in time in our country's history. So.
Yeah, and so so the great pivot is as we hear all these things now, and I think Karen, you nailed it. I think there's going to be an evolution somewhere between what you mentioned, Greg, about what type of education you need. I know when I graduated from with my bachelor's in education, I had someone in the business field recruit me. And he said, for all the things he said, we want someone that's we'll teach you up. It was basically a software, hardware type of thing. And he said, we actually have more success finding someone that doesn't have a degree in tech, because they'll listen to us and they'll get taught. So we can teach you our way. But they wanted someone that, was successful, could navigate school, had good grades, blah, blah, blah. But I think that the industry, if you look at education as an industry, which it is, I think 3-year bachelor's degrees it's just right on the corner, maybe looking at what the crucial things they need. I know as an educator, as a teacher, I learned more the first year I was in the classroom by myself than all the pedagogy classes combined. I mean, when they shut that door and you got your kids by yourself, oh my gosh. I mean, I was just anxious, so you learn a lot. And so I think there should be an overhaul of education. We see, and over the years, it just, the pendulum just swings back and forth. So, and I think and most of the time for the right reasons. I think the intentions are honorable, maybe not the results. And so I went through the whole piece where, everybody needed to go to college. And that wasn't necessarily because college was great, but because of the populations and the communities of folks that were not given the opportunity. So different folks of different backgrounds, whether it was racial, economic, these type of things, weren't getting the opportunity to go to college. They didn't have access to an AP class or these type of things. And so that was when the pendulum swung all that way. Everybody's got to have access to college. And that's true. The access piece is great. But the trades, the plumber, electrician, the carpenter, all those things were neglected. And so the skill sets, the population of people that can do those jobs was neglected, and there was a gap, and so now I think it's coming back to the center, because now it's we use terms like post-secondary training, these type of things, and so I think you're going to see an overhaul. But education, I know they're talking about being able to get a bachelor's degree in 3 years, and I think that's probably doobable.
Well, I think you hit on it too, that we're going to start to run into this model of there's obviously the risk of job loss and professions that an AI, I think a lot of us are playing with it every day and saying, gee, it can do that, do some really interesting things. But I think there's going to be that again, there's going to be a lot of trades, especially where it's, as far as we know, AI is not going to be down there with the plumber's crack fixing your pipes yet. And so stuff like that's going to become much more compelling. I know with some of my kids, it was a matter of, I wouldn't have cared if they wanted to go to trade school or whatever. They were built with typical white collar skills. And frankly, there's a certain point you need to check the box that you had a degree, more as much as anything else. And again, we could talk about what we want them to get a degree, but what they need to check the box. And now you feel like that whole model is going to be reviewed at the very least, to where you're going, Paul, is like what we think about education, the value, and maybe it's a refresh we need to think about what really education is driving, in terms of our society, and technology is going to be a huge component of it, So, but I think Karin, to your point earlier about the exit path, because it's almost like the turn we're all gonna that education is going to go through, our kids who are in school are going to go through. It's going to be pretty radical, I think, in the very near future. It's already, and it's going to get much more radical.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a 3-year degree, bachelor's degree, is fantastic, because I think there's a lot of colleges, most of them actually, that build in at least an extra year for gen eds.
Yeah.
And state schools are infamous for it, right? And to some point, it's not necessarily a bad thing if you've got a kid who's 18, 19 years old, right out of high school, really doesn't know what they want to do, really doesn't know what their strengths are, hasn't had the high school experience where they got to take literature classes, or African history classes, or European history classes, lab sciences. So I mean, I think gen eds have a place, but for a lot of schools, that's their bread and butter. that's how they keep students longer. That's how, it's not a 4-year degree, it's a 5-year degree.
Sure.
So there's the almighty dollar pushing that agenda rather than how efficiently are we educating people, and are we educating them correctly, for what skills we actually need.
You wonder
It's
though
true.
if the schools, I'm sorry to interrupt, if the schools might start to look at us. I was thinking about it as you guys were talking. The first time I've heard about the 3-year degree is it's almost going to be like a sports contract, Paul, where they're looking at what is the average annual value, right? So if they can get, I mean, obviously the number now it's hitting 100, right, for major schools, 100,000 a year, major private schools. They can get 3 years, 100,000, but they can get 2 students. Maybe they get a student they wouldn't have gotten because so now your total cost isn't 400, it's 300, but they can get more students to buy into that concept. They ultimately that might become the profit model, right? So Karen, I think
Right.
your point, yeah, they don't want to give the almighty dollar, but could they change around? We're in a sense going to change. We're going to reduce your portion size. We're going to charge you the same amount, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So and try
Yeah,
to
but I
get it
mean,
that way going.
well, and I think like Brown University, someone released the fact that a year at Brown University is $6 shy of $100,000 a
Yeah.
year
Yep.
now. But the people and Brown had made a commitment that, if you get in, we will figure out a way to financially support you through grants or, merit scholarships or whatever. But on the flip side, they have enough people that are writing out a blank check
Yeah.
because they get those people that have the money, right? The celebrities, kids, and all of that. When you're talking about kind of the average state school, you don't have the same kind of pocketbooks coming through to supplement the students that are taking just 3 years, or the students who need the financial aid or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, I think education should get a really big overhaul, and it probably will, but I think it's going to be a really different conversation if you're a community college versus a state school versus a private versus an Ivy,
Well, I
or
think
maybe Ivy.
So years ago, so we have, and I'm sure this is common throughout the country, we had what we call concurrent enrollment. So kids could be taking classes at the community college. And so what we had, a lot of our children that didn't have access to college, first generation kids. And so a lot of them struggled with math. So if they went to community college just out of the chute, they would take their placement test and they'd have to do a remediation class and then your college algebra, just for the sake of conversation. So I went to the university because I didn't have teachers that were I had teachers that actually taught at the community college and said, let's do this. Let's have those kids take that remediation their junior year. And then their senior year, they'll take college 10-10. And I said, and I was very clear with it. And I met with the president of the university and the math department. I said, now I'm talking about people that are not going to be engineers. Okay, they're going to be like one of my daughters was an English major. She just passed the 10-10 algebra. That's the only math class. She's a great educator. So I was very clear. I said, these are not people that are going to go into careers or degrees that are math intensive. These are folks that are more liberal arts, these type of things. And I said, this way, I said, you'll increase your graduation rate because the classes that are the most difficult, they'll have out of the way. They'll have their math done when they walk out the door from school. Karin and Greg, you just both nailed it. They didn't want anything to do with that. You know why? Because the bottom line, how many kids, they counted on that, the math department financially, to have all those the remediation and those classes. That would have taken away, X amount of sections, from them. And I thought this is just great because I was focused basically on how can we help the children be successful. And if they're not math guys,
God
they're going to,
Yeah, you silly man.
And they were, and my teachers, my faculty member were adjunct professors in that school. So it wasn't like I was looking for a roundabout. I was just saying, hey, but basically what would happen is the kids would take the class for a year. It was a semester course, but we could teach a little bit slower. And I said, so this was a great win. Man, I got shot down. I had my legislator come with me because he couldn't believe it was that. I said, watch this. And that's with my experience. I said, I had a solution for the children that struggled with math, and I got turned down. It was the bottom dollar. These teachers would have less classes to teach in this thing. So that overhauls are, is well needed, and there's not one size fits all. Let's kind of figure out what's best for the kids and best for what's going to produce a very employable, effective community of folks that can meet the needs of our community. We need a plumber. We need someone to call up those things, and we need folks that are at the highest level solving stuff that I can't even wrap my brain around.
Right.
Yeah.
That whole thing of the gap in the trades reminds me of China's one-child law. How
Yeah.
they thought that,
Yeah.
boys are the way to go. We only want the boys, get the girls out, adopt them out, put them in orphanages, drown them in the river, whatever. And then all of a sudden somebody went, wait, we got nobody else left to make babies with all these boys.
Well,
Damn.
what
Right.
it's doing to their
And I,
society for men who can't get a partner, right? And it's frankly going to probably lead to AI solutions in that front too. But I think it's had such an erosion in terms of their social fabric, not just because they can't reproduce, but because you have loneliness. I think if it, from everything
right.
you read and see, it's
Right.
no, but
Right.
it's
And
great.
just, nature likes its balances.
Yep.
But,
Yeah.
the gap in pushing everybody towards college instead of the trades, I
Yep.
feel like we've created a similar type of gap where, yeah, people who should have no business playing with electricity are trying to play with electricity. It's
Right.
not okay.
Exactly. No, exactly. And I guess I've run into that one with a couple of my kids where it's like, well, why don't they go into trades? Like, yeah, that's not what they're built to do. But
No.
again, I
Right.
think
No.
it's gonna be interesting how we move through the how people, because it's going to be a financial issue, and you're going to get involved in universal basic income, but it's also going to be it's not just about matter of if it, and I know, and obviously we're a long way from being to a point where we're cutting people a check based on a dividend of technology, because God knows that won't create trillionaires, but it's more a matter of, I think people need to have a meaning in their life, I think. And I think our work is so important to our, what we do. And maybe that'll change. Maybe that should change. But right now it's hard to imagine people getting that fulfillment without bringing something to the table, in terms of
Yeah.
their economic viability, et cetera.
And I don't know if your kids, but my kids are really all bought into the, that life work balance.
Yeah.
That is something generational that they're really, it's a value to them. And,
Mhm.
and I know some of my kids struggle because, what's the value? What's the satisfaction in what I do each day, and so it lends into that. And then, you talk about this AI component and, what's actual facts, what's real. It has all these layers. And then Karen, going back to what you said earlier, some of these strongholds of these red states, their educational standard is so minimal, and so their capacity to start processing these this resources of information is truly problematic. And so
It's
it's
concerning to me that like
a journey.
we've talked about, and it is talked about, the wealth gap, how it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I get concerned about the, for lack of a better term, intelligence gap, critical thinking gap,
Yeah.
right? So to wrap it back around to the AI, like are the kids that are upcoming, going through college now and upcoming going through college with AI, are we going to end up with a critical thinking gap and intelligence gap, because they're not stretching that part of their brain? They're not, they're taking the easy way out by writing their papers with AI, getting all their answers through AI. In another 20 years, are we going to be like, wow, we're all significantly dumber?
Yeah, or
And
we
we're
could
not
end
putting
up
out.
with a reflection pool that's green and
Oh
peeling.
God, yeah. Son of a, yeah.
There's a
And
lack of
apparently we're going to
intelligence.
arrest
Right there,
science
you
over it.
go.
Apparently, they said they're
Right?
going to
Yeah.
arrest the vandals. And like, are they arresting science? Because it feels like this was but I think, and I think the really, the important point to this too is this is not a MAGA thing either. All three of us, we spend enough time on Facebook. We see each other there. A lot of people who are aligned with our way of thinking, they're missing the boat on this one too. So this is not a, hey, we could say maybe it's a little more of a defining characteristic among MAGA, but there's a lot of times you got to tell people, look, that picture of Trump doing this, that's not real. And we got enough stuff on him, we don't need to make stuff up.
Right. No.
But anyway, guys, hey, I really appreciate it, you guys jumping on here. This is a little bit of we did this episode a little special, but one of the things I really loved about tonight was we took this subject, and I think it really played into the not just the passions, but the professional expertise of both of you, especially. And I think this is what I love about when we do this is that we took it where it naturally went. And I think we had a really interesting conversation and just complaining about data centers. And I really appreciate it, guys. So a great conversation. Look forward to talking to you guys again soon. But have a great week, and we'll see what more stuff with green algae pools we get and stuff by the next time we talk.
Okay.
So, okay.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.